Dear listeners, let's get to know each other even better. Please write your name and let us know if you're a subscriber to our channel. Also, share what you like and what you don't like about our channel. Thank you. Everything is said, she thought. By the time he understands what has happened, it will be too late, and he will no longer be part of this family. Then my daughter can be with someone deserving of her. The woman looked down, snatching the framed photograph of her daughter with that man she disapproved of. She sneered as she thought, an engineer of all things. She could have married someone much more distinguished, someone with power and influence, unlike her father. Well, she would have her chance again, whether she wanted it or not. The woman stared into the mirror and was astonished at the older person looking back. She cringed at the wrinkles that adorned her once beautiful face and the gray that insidiously crept into her once lustrous blonde hair. She turned away and smirked. No matter what, her daughter would succeed where she failed. She just needed a little push. Now that her two granddaughters were grown and out of the house, there was no longer a reason to wait. It was time to make a change. I want you out of this house now, I calmly told my wife of 22 years, shaking my head. She was still striking, standing just under 5'11", with her blonde hair cascading over her sleek shoulders and slender waist. I always knew Dani had a temper, much like her quick-to-anger mother, but normally she would have calmed down by now. I say normally with a hint of sarcasm. This time, she was pulling out all the stops. Ain't going to happen, Dani. Now, do you want to tell me what I did wrong this time? My wife stood there, her deep blue eyes radiating frustration. Don't give me that innocent act. You know damn well what you did. I am not going to live with a liar. That's good to hear, Dani. Neither will I. What did your mother do this time? My mother has nothing to do with this. You have humiliated me for the last time. Get out. Get out. No, I said coolly. This is my home, and I am not going anywhere just because you say so. If you don't want to be with me or in the same house, then you can leave. As for me, I'm going to grab a beer, head into the family room, sit down, and watch the game. You're welcome to join me when you're ready to calmly discuss whatever I've supposedly done. Dani screamed a few unintelligible phrases, and I watched as her long, slender legs turned and stomped off to the bedroom. Seconds later, the house shook when the bedroom door slammed shut, followed by the metallic click as she locked it, as if that would keep me out. I settled back in my favorite chair, a well-worn green fabric recliner, and smiled as I popped the tab on my beer, hearing that distinctive hiss. I switched on the cable and thought about how I should feel upset or worried about the latest conflict with Dani, but I just didn't care. There was a time when I would have, when we first started dating and maybe during the first couple of years of marriage. But not now. After 22-plus years of her temper and indignation, coupled with raising two spirited daughters, I learned how to tune out the noise. I clicked on the game and grinned as Hunter snagged a high fly ball. If you're wondering why I didn't seem bothered, it's because, for the past month, she had been quite difficult, her frustration at an all-time high. I wondered if Mackenzie, RWS, and Forest Incorporated might have some work available out of the country. Between innings, I speculated that Dani's mother was behind this latest drama, as she had been with most of the others. That woman had caused more heartache and trouble for my family than I could count. Dani's mom, Roomhilda, though that's not really her name, it's Olivia Matilda, is one woman I have never gotten along with. Well, actually, she hates my guts, and I really have no idea why. Usually, it's the father who has a problem with his daughter's boyfriends, fiancés, and eventually husbands, but Dani's dad, Harvey, and I got along famously. However, her mother, given the opportunity, would probably hire someone to take care of me. I guess she always believed her baby deserved better than settling for little ol' me. Of course, I didn't help much. After a decade of her antics, I began to give as much as I received, which didn't help my loving relationship with Dani, but it always seemed to put a smile on her father's normally cheerless face. I started dating Danny just before graduating from Cal State. I had spent nearly 4 grueling years studying mechanical engineering because I wanted to build things, like buildings, bridges, and other structures. Danny was majoring in general studies, taking only the courses required by the state. She was bright, but she was no rocket scientist, and was always the first to admit it. Still, you had to admire that she at least believed in a strong education, if not in a particular field. I first spotted Danny in the university library, where she was with 2 other stunning women. I was completely infatuated with her, but hopelessly unable to meet her. When it came to exceptionally beautiful women, I always became tongue-tied and clumsy. I had girlfriends in high school and during the first couple of years at Cal State, and they were pretty, but not stunning beauties like Danny and her friends. Whenever I took a girl out, I always made sure she had a good time. Word got out that I was a class act, and any girl that went out with me never had to worry about feeling pressured. I always made sure they felt comfortable and didn't have to deal with any unwanted expectations. I'm not a total loser. Standing at 6 feet and 185 pounds, my deep green eyes and black curly hair reflected my heritage, and my natural tan complexion suggested some Native American ancestry. Who knows? If my looks didn't give you a clue about my ancestry, my name would. Michael Patrick O'Flynn. I was always called by my namesake, my grandfather Michael, known as Big Mike. My 5 brothers and 2 of my 3 sisters always called me Little Mike. Only my mother, father, and my closest sister, Caitlin, called me Patrick after my mother's brother. My uncle, Patrick Sean, died a month after I was born, killed in the line of duty while trying to stop the robbery and assault of a young woman while serving in the Los Angeles Police Department. Other than a few scrapes and bruises, the woman survived, but my uncle took 2 bullets to the chest. This was before Kevlar vests were required. The victim said my uncle was able to snap off 3 rounds, killing the suspect as he was falling, 2 in the chest and 1 to the head. In his honor, my mother and father always called me Patrick. My friends knew me as Pat. No, I didn't heed the call to protect and serve, but I always maintained a deep appreciation for those in law enforcement, not just for my uncle, but for 3 brothers and 1 sister who all wore the badge. The toughest of the bunch was probably my sister Caitlin. I digress. Returning to Danny, I instantly lost my heart to the woman I was determined to marry, and I proceeded to make a lasting impression on her. Blinded by my feelings, I tripped over someone's backpack, tumbled forward, and struck my head on a table corner. When I came around, I found myself lying on a bed in a dark room, the sound of a series of short beeps rattling through my skull like a herd of charging rhinos. I tried lifting my head to see where I was and instantly regretted it. My head felt like it was clamped in a vise as someone cranked down on the lever. Falling back, I heard a worried voice softly say, "Don't try to move. You took a bad hit to your head when you fell into that table." This time, I didn't try to see who owned those comforting words, nor did I attempt to speak, as I quickly passed out. I guess it was morning because, when I awoke, there was daylight streaming in. I tried to rub my head, but my hand was smacked away. "Don't touch the dressing," ordered a rough but feminine voice. Opening my eyes, I saw what could only be Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She was attractive and blonde, wearing one of those old-fashioned hats that looked like tiny folded paper boats, the kind I used to float down the gutter. She appeared to be around 40, with a permanent frown attached to that pretty face. "Mr. O'Flynn, I will not tolerate any attempts to touch or disturb your dressing. Do I make myself clear?" I nodded meekly and made sure both hands were resting at my side. "Thank you," she snapped, turning to leave the room. "She can be a bit much," a soft voice muttered. "Nurse Alcock nearly tore my head off when I touched your cheek." I turned toward the voice and was startled to see the reason for my predicament standing by my bed. Danny. She stood by the railing, her fingers twisted in the bars, staring down at me. "How are you feeling?" Better," I managed to say, at a loss for words. "You look better. Your color has come back. You took a nasty fall, and your head struck the corner of that table. I think you tripped over someone's backpack. It shouldn't have been so far out in the way." I replied, still dazed. Why are you here?" I asked, stunned that such a beautiful girl would be concerned about me. She bit her lower lip, a habit I found endearing when she was nervous. "I felt sorry and wanted to check up on you. I think you're cute. I've seen you around campus a number of times and always wanted to meet you, but I was too shy. You never seemed to notice me. Your nose was always buried in a book. Sorry about that. I never knew. Believe me, I could never have ignored anybody as lovely as you," I replied, realizing I might have sounded a bit foolish. "What were you going to say?" she asked, curiosity lighting up her eyes. "I really don't want to say," I admitted, chiding myself for my hesitation. She took my hand and held it, urging me to please tell her. Looking into her sky-blue eyes, I melted. Since I'd known her, I had never been able to resist those precious eyes of hers. "It was because of you I tripped and fell in the library." Her eyes opened wide in shock at my statement. "What?" I smiled and quietly said, "Yeah, when I turned and saw you for the first time, standing there with your friends, I lost my balance and fell. The next thing I know, I'm waking up here. I'm sorry, but I get kind of clumsy around beautiful girls." Danny was staring at me with a huge smile. "You think I'm beautiful? I think you are the most exquisite and extraordinary girl these eyes have ever seen. I wanted to meet you, but, well, you saw," I said, and we both laughed. When Danny realized she had giggled at my accident, a horrified look emerged on her face, and she began apologizing. "Oh God, Patrick, I'm so sorry. This isn't funny. You were badly hurt, and the campus nurse thought you had suffered a concussion." Embarrassed, Danny ran from the room. Feeling bad, I never had the chance to thank her for being with me, but I suddenly realized she called me Patrick. How did she know I went by my middle name? Once out of the hospital, I summoned the courage to find Danny and ask her out. Our relationship turned into a whirlwind courtship. Luckily, I graduated with honors and was immediately hired by a well-known engineering and development company, Rolls and Forest Incorporated. I started at the bottom of the heap, but I could have cared less. It was a great firm, and I was doing what I'd always wanted to do: build things, plain and simple. I remember the first time I met Danny's parents, Harvey and Olivia, and quickly understood who my competition would be. Her mother, a beautiful woman, was gracious enough during our first meeting, but I felt the underlying antipathy toward me. While she exhibited a brilliant smile, her eyes revealed a certain repulsion for her daughter's boyfriend and potential future fiancé. Harvey, on the other hand, seemed taken with me, friendly and extremely gracious. He would take me by the arm and escort me into his sanctuary, his den. There we would smoke his Cubans, have a beer or two, and talk baseball or football. He never spoke of a favorite team. He loved them all. There were times Danny would have to kidnap me from her father. But Danny's mom was the polar opposite of Harvey. Rarely would she speak to me, and most times she would refuse to acknowledge my presence. Of course, I didn't mind much. I may have been shy around beautiful women once, but I was no wallflower when it came to Danny and me. Plus, my rather boisterous and opinionated family had long given me the confidence to navigate the world and feel good about myself, so nothing Danny's mom could do or say ever shook my faith in myself or Danny. And believe me, she tried. I lost count of how many times Olivia attempted to set her daughter up with one of those wealthy individuals from the proper side of town. To satisfy her mother, Danny did go out with a few of these spoiled rich kids, but after each date, she would always return to me. As I made my mark at Mackenzie, Rolls, and Forest, I rose quickly in the firm. They soon discovered that not only was I a competent designer and engineer, but I also had a knack for getting the job done ahead of deadlines. I was good with people, particularly with the men and women who gave their sweat, labor, and sometimes their blood on site. I soon became a project manager, usually given the ventures that proved difficult for other managers. My reputation as a troubleshooter grew, and with it, my income. Without saying anything to Danny, I began looking at houses as a future home for the two of us. I hadn't asked her to marry me yet, but I was pretty confident she would say yes. I hadn't counted on the unexpected challenge that lay ahead. One warm evening, Danny and I were sitting on the beach, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. Holding her in my arms, she nuzzled her face into my neck and shoulders. I could smell the sweet essence of flowers in her hair as I kissed her golden locks. Without moving her head, she whispered, "Yes, Patrick." She always liked calling me Patrick. "Will you?" "What?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "Will you marry me?" With my right hand, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box. She straightened up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Danny, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" In my hand, I held the box out to her. Her shoulders began to tremble as I opened it, revealing the shiny white gold band with a 3-carat, marquise cut diamond. As she gazed at the ring, I carefully took her left hand. "Danny, will you marry me?" "Yes, yes, yes," she cried as I slipped the ring over her finger. She delicately fingered the band, and then launched herself into my arms, her entire body trembling as she silently wept. "I began to think you were never going to ask me," she sniffled. "I thought my mother had frightened you from ever wanting to marry me. I am so happy I was wrong," she sobbed. I gently took her chin in my grasp and lifted her face, her eyes wet from tears. I leaned in and softly kissed her lips. Pulling back, I said, "Nothing could have kept me from marrying you, Danny. You are so precious to me. I love you so much that at times it hurts to breathe. Oh, dear God, I love you so much," she cried, pulling me tight against her, our lips meeting again. I did the traditional thing and asked her father for her hand in marriage, which he gladly approved. I think it infuriated Danny's mother when we announced our engagement. My family held the mother of all celebrations. With great reluctance, Olivia accompanied Harvey to the O'Flynn home, where they began to comprehend the magnitude of their latest addition to the Doofus family. All of the O'Flynns and the Cooleys were there. Both my mother and father came from large families and were known for their longevity. Hell, even my great-great-grandfather, Seamus Michael O'Flynn, was still alive at 98. He couldn't get around much, but the great patriarch still had a terrific thirst for the amber liquid. Of course, it had to be Irish whiskey. Danny's family wasn't as large and nowhere near as diverse. They came from old money. Harvey's family wasn't small. He had 2 brothers and 1 sister, but both his parents had passed away. Olivia was an only child, survived by her estranged father, whose whereabouts were unknown. Like her mother, Danny was also an only child. The one hiccup in our engagement was the selection of churches for the wedding. Danny had a Methodist upbringing, while I was Roman Catholic, reflecting my Irish heritage. The solution came from Danny. We would first be married early in the morning in her church, and then rush off to my family's church minutes afterward. The reception would be held on neutral ground, a large ballroom of a very old and extremely popular hotel. I didn't confide in Danny that my mother's youngest brother was the owner of that hotel. The weddings and the reception went off without a hitch. The Protestant church was small but filled to capacity. The wedding was a quiet, brief, and gracious affair. The O'Flynn church was grand and also filled to capacity. The wedding was long and generous, as most Catholic weddings are, full of rituals and procedures. However, we managed to survive. The reception, however, was another matter entirely, lively and loud, complete with spirited entertainment and music, coupled with a smattering of energetic congratulations toward the bride and groom. It was a typical Irish celebration. Danny and I were finally able to sneak out just after 2 in the morning. I later heard the party continued until well after 4. We spent our honeymoon in Hawaii, as far away from any living relations as possible, and had a wonderful time together. I have no doubt Katie was conceived in Kauai in a quaint little bed and breakfast. 2 years later, Ashlyn was born. Katie was the image of her mother, with full blonde curls and deep blue eyes. Ashlyn had wavy black hair and the deepest emerald eyes I've ever seen. Along with Danny, both were my life. Over the years, the girls took after Danny with their extraordinary beauty and grace. My wife taught them well, the ways of people and how to understand them. Katie was the princess, and many times I had to endure the anxieties of fatherhood when it came to boys calling on her. Katie became the most popular girl in school and went through all the trappings of a beautiful young woman. She became head cheerleader and queen of the prom. But because of her mother, Katie never lost herself in her popularity. She always remained level-headed. Ashlyn definitely displayed my side of the family. She was a tomboy, rambunctious and full of energy. Several of my brothers taught her the art of self-defense, and she became extremely proficient in the study of Aikido and Taekwondo. By the time she turned 16, Ashlyn was a third-level black belt and boasted over a dozen trophies from her matches. She was also bilingual in French and Spanish. French from her mother and Spanish from my sister Caitlin. Because of her job with the LAPD, Caitlin believed being proficient in Spanish would be extremely helpful. Ashlyn was now currently studying Mandarin Chinese. I often wondered why. Also a gorgeous creature, Ashlyn had her father's dark features and deep green eyes, with her black hair cascading to the small of her back. Ashlyn broke many hearts, and she was also Katie's protector, whether Katie wanted it or not. Years later, I found out that during the last week of Katie's senior year, she went with several of her friends for a senior ditch day. Unknown to her, her friends had made plans to meet with some boys at a beach house. While there, Katie was talked into drinking a glass of wine, but she didn't know one of the boys had spiked the bottle with a concoction of his own, a mixture that altered their state of mind. Soon, all 3 girls were under its effects and quickly found themselves in a difficult situation. There was a fight among the 4 boys regarding Katie, as they all wanted attention from her. The biggest of the bunch swept the semi-conscious girl into his arms and strolled into a back bedroom. As he set Katie on the bed, he heard a loud crash and screaming come from the front room. He grinned, thinking the guys were fighting over the other 2 girls, and leaned down over Katie. Just as he was about to do something inappropriate, the bedroom door slammed open. "What the hell?" he bellowed, turning in surprise to find a young woman with black hair standing in the doorway, dressed in an old pair of torn jeans, a black t-shirt, and worn work boots. The young man smiled and said, "You'll have to wait your turn, cutie. Just give me a few minutes." The doctor would later inform the boy's parents that he suffered a fractured jaw, 2 broken ribs, and other injuries. All 4 boys were arrested for possession of drugs, drugging the girls, attempted assault, and other charges. The parents of the boys considered suing for injuries to their sons, but their attorneys advised against it. It wouldn't look good to have 4 college jocks taken down by a slight 16-year-old girl. I never heard the full story until much later. At the time of the incident, I was in Southeast Asia, working on a bridge over a large gorge in a remote jungle so that an American oil company could access rich oil fields. When I returned home, all I was told was that several boys had tried to make inappropriate advances on Katie and her friends, and that the boys were punished for it. It wasn't until 2.5 years later that I learned the truth. My sister Caitlin finally told me what happened, thinking it was safe to clue me in after Ash's graduation from high school. She didn't think I would do anything about it. How wrong she was. But that's another story. By then, both girls were out of the house. Katie had graduated from USC with a degree in fine arts and design, and had already landed a position with an up-and-coming design studio in Los Angeles. Ash was currently attending MIT, hoping to follow in my footsteps, much to Caitlin's and my brother's disappointment. They had hoped she would enter law enforcement. I was surprised by Ash's choice of career when she told me, and I couldn't have been prouder. Danny always liked to say I had tears in my eyes. Maybe. The home seemed so empty after the girls left. It was hard for me, but it must have been terrible for Danny. When Katie was born, Danny became a stay-at-home mom, much to Olivia's distress. With my salary, we could well afford it. However, Olivia was incensed and compelled to remind her daughter that she was losing her independence and freedom. There were times I could see the seeds of discontent in Danny's eyes, but for the most part, she was a loving and fiercely loyal mother. Now, with the girls away and me always working, I worried Danny would start listening to Olivia. After that day, I was right. When the game ended, I moved into the den to do some last-minute work on designs for a new high-rise in Orange County. I could hear Danny moving around in the bedroom, and the sound of water running. She must be preparing a bath, I thought. I then heard the bedroom door open and 2 loud thumps in the hallway. The door closed again, followed by the sound of the lock clicking. Curious, I got up and walked into the hallway. Sitting in front of the bedroom door were my 2 suitcases. I didn't have to figure out what was in them. Shaking my head, I approached the door and turned the knob, only to find it locked. I knocked on the door and said, "Danny, please let me in. We really need to discuss whatever is bothering you." "I have nothing to say." "Now take the hint and leave." Oh, this was going to be fun, I thought. I stepped back a few paces and lifted my foot, kicking the door. My brothers had taught me the proper way to kick in a door. The bedroom door exploded inward, followed by a high-pitched scream as the door flew open. I picked up the 2 suitcases, walked in, and tossed them onto the bed. Danny was cowering by the nightstand as I began unpacking. I took my time, deliberately returning each and every item she had tossed into those 2 suitcases to their original locations. Without saying a word, I grabbed a clean pair of boxers and a t-shirt, my usual sleeping attire, and moved into the bathroom. Once I was done, I returned and slid into bed. Danny hadn't moved. "God damn you, Patrick," she growled, stomping into the bathroom and slamming the door shut. She was good at that. I smiled to myself before falling asleep. She always had a fiery spirit when she was upset. The next morning, I awoke to silence. Turning over, I noticed Danny hadn't come to bed, which was no small surprise. When I got up, the house was empty. Danny wasn't home. On the kitchen counter, I found a simple white envelope. This wasn't good. Opening it, I removed a single-page letter. "Patrick, I can no longer live with you. Since you won't leave, I must. I have moved in with Mom and Dad. Knowing how you feel about my mother, moving in with her should make your day. You want to know why I hate you? One word, Crystal. Try explaining that away and don't try to deny it." Crystal admitted everything, and she had pictures. "I am filing for divorce. I thought you loved me, but now I see everything. You will hear from my attorney. At least I'll be fair. The house will be sold, and everything will be split down the middle. Since the girls are of age, we won't have to worry about them. But I do expect you to continue with Ashlyn's college expenses. Please don't fight me on this. I don't want to make this any uglier than you've already made it. Don't try to contact me. If you do, I'll be forced to get a restraining order on you. My mother has already tried to convince me to do so. You'll be pleased to know my father doesn't believe you've cheated on me. I guess men always stick together. I will tell the girls we have separated and will be getting a divorce, but I will not tell them why. I'll leave that little tidbit for you. Goodbye. Denny. P.S. I guess my mother was right all along. Pictures. Crystal. What the hell is she talking about? I thought. This sounds a lot like her mother. I thought about Crystal, one of Danny's closest friends from high school. They still kept in touch, but I never cared for her. She always seemed to be sizing me up. Last year, during a Halloween party at our home, I was in the cellar getting more beer when Crystal appeared, wearing a costume that was meant to be alluring. Patrick, where have you been all night?" she asked with a smirk. "Crystal, what do you think you're doing?" I replied, maintaining my distance. "Oh, come on, Hat. You know you want to hang out." She stepped closer, but I pushed her back, startled. "Crystal, I love my wife. I have no desire for you or anyone else. You're Danny's friend, and I'll always consider you as such. For the sake of our friendship, don't ever be around me again. Understand?" Nodding meekly, she whispered, "I'm sorry. Yes, I understand," and left. Nothing was ever said about that encounter again. When I called Crystal's apartment, there was no answer. I figured as much, but what neither Danny nor Crystal realized was that I knew where she worked. Crystal was a dancer at a gentleman's club on the outskirts of town. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I waited outside the club, next to her little red Spider. The side door swung open, and the girls started pouring out, followed by their escorts and the bouncers. When Crystal saw me standing by her car, she said something to two rather large men who glared at me as they approached. I continued to lean against the fender of Crystal's car. "What the hell are you doing here? You've got 10 seconds to get the hell out of here before I make you regret it," the largest of the two warned. Just as he was about to grab me, a couple of shotgun sounds echoed through the parking lot, causing the two men to freeze. Ignoring the bouncer, I approached Crystal, who was now frozen in place. One of the bouncers moved toward me, but Caitlin stepped out of the shadows and said, "I wouldn't." He gasped as he stared at the petite woman holding a semi-automatic 12-gauge shotgun aimed at him. Two large men stepped out from behind a parked truck, one holding a similar weapon. "On your stomachs now," my brother Brian ordered. Both bouncers dropped like stones to the pavement. "Well, long time no see, Chris. How have you been?" I asked. How did you find me?" she whispered. "Crystal, I make it my business to know about my wife's friends. Did you forget my brothers and sister are cops in this city? Are you that stupid?" She looked around frantically until suddenly her shoulders slumped. Closing her eyes and sighing, she opened them and looked at me. "What do you want?" "You already know the answer to that. Who put you up to this, and where did you get the photos?" "Patrick, you already know who's behind it. She's hated you from day one for taking her baby girl away. As for the pictures, it's digital magic. Olivia hired some guy to follow you around and take pictures. Once he got a few good ones, he took some of me and merged them. Not bad, either. I kept one because I've always wanted you." "How much?" I asked. "10K. Olivia paid you $10,000 to set me up." "Yep. That is one vengeful witch. I played up to Danny for 4 weeks. Once I showed Danny the pictures and told her about our little affair, dear sweet Olivia paid me the money. I have to say, it took a lot of convincing to get Danny to believe me. I couldn't have done it without the photos. Even then, she didn't want to believe it. I told her I'd always had a thing for you and seduced you a couple of years back. We had this off and on situation during those 2 years, Patrick. She wanted to kill me. She was so devastated." "Who was the photographer?" "Don't know. Some guy. Mr. Pie something. Olivia is the one who gave me the pictures. So, what are you going to do now, Patrick?" "I'm not going to say anything to Danny, and I know you won't hurt me." "There's nothing you can do to convince her I was lying." I smiled and reached into my shirt pocket. Her sneer vanished when she saw the recorder. "You son of a..." "Crystal, I'd be real careful what you say about my mother. I won't hurt you, but I can't answer for my sister Caitlin. You remember Caitlin, don't you?" Crystal nervously glanced at my sister, who was still holding the shotgun. "Now you'd better listen, and listen very carefully, Crystal. I've got you on some serious charges. You conspired to commit several felonies. I think it would be in your best interest to play along. Let's face it, I've got you in a tough spot. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. For now, I want you to remain out of sight. Don't say anything to anybody, especially Olivia or Danny. Understand?" Crystal reluctantly nodded. "Patrick, you should know this. Olivia has Ted Bauman sniffing around Danny. She's hired him to seduce her. Olivia believes that once Danny gives in to Ted, there's no way you'll forgive her. She's right about that. Does her father know anything about what's been going on? Crystal laughed. Oh, that poor man doesn't know anything about what your mother-in-law does. Why he stays with her is a mystery. Okay, thanks for the heads up. Now, do your part and stay hidden. Crystal nodded. I turned and shrugged at my sister and brother. Just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. The two bouncers slowly got up, still a little worried. As I left, going over my mental checklist, I thought, Crystal is taken care of. Now Ted Bauman. Ted would be easy. Fast cars, hot women, booze, and drugs. He was into all of it. His parents had paid a small fortune to bail him out over the years, and it cost them a lot to make certain charges disappear. Besides his looks, good old Ted did have one thing in his favor: his inheritance, when his old man passed. That was something Olivia wanted her claws hooked into, and Danny was the bait. As I said, Ted did have the looks. He was tall, with long, wavy blonde hair and gray eyes. The 40-year-old spent most of his time either at the gym or on the tennis court to maintain his athletic physique. Daniel Philip Bauman considered himself quite the catch, leaving a trail of broken hearts behind him. And Danny was evidently his next target. Ted Bauman loved to drive expensive cars and was currently cruising around in a silver Bentley Continental GT convertible. My brother Brian managed to stop him for running a red light and issued the man a citation. Brian laughed when he told me he nearly took Ted to jail for refusing to sign the ticket. He actually had him cuffed and in the back of his patrol car until Ted finally agreed to sign. I guess you have to let these guys go when they finally decide to cooperate. That night, I sat just down the street from my in-laws' house and waited. Sure enough, a silver Bentley convertible pulled into the driveway. Activating the camcorder, I watched as Ted got out of the car, sauntered up to the front door, and knocked. Soon, the door opened, revealing Olivia, who smiled and hugged him. She vanished when Danny appeared, smiling as Ted took her hand and kissed it. With a pleased expression, Olivia waved and yelled for the couple to have a good time. This was getting better and better. Thankfully, his car was facing the same direction as mine, so it was easy to follow them. As Olivia had already gone back inside, I passed the house and trailed them downtown, where Ted pulled into the parking lot of a posh nightclub, the Ritz. Donnie and I had been there once, but we weren't impressed. The club was expensive and packed with spoiled, pretentious rich kids having fun on their parents' dime. I parked further down the street and paid the steep cover charge. Once inside, it wasn't hard to spot the two of them. So far, only one of them seemed invested. Danny didn't appear impressed by Ted. Every time he put his arm around her shoulders or waist, she nonchalantly removed it. After a round of drinks, she always loved her Chardonnay. He led her onto the dance floor for a fast number. God, after 20-plus years, Danny still took my breath away. She moved with the grace of a gazelle as she danced to the music. Just as the band neared the end of the piece, Ted moved behind her, attempting some close dancing. It didn't work. The moment she felt him getting too close, she walked off the floor. I grinned as he frowned, watching her retreat to their booth. Once they were back at their table, Ted ordered another round. Suddenly, he had to slide out of the booth to allow Danny to go to the ladies' room. While she was gone, the waitress brought the drinks. After the waitress left, Ted removed something from his pocket and fiddled with it before holding it over Danny's glass of wine. I couldn't see if anything fell in, but I did see him stir the goblet with his pinky. It looked like he was planning something. I looked around the room and spotted a disheveled-looking young man hanging onto the bar. Approaching him, I whispered in his ear to see if he'd like to make a quick $50. At first, the guy looked at me skeptically, but when I explained what I wanted, he smiled and nodded. After slipping him a $20, I told him he would get the rest afterward, and he nodded. Danny was pushing her way through the crowd and had just settled back into the booth when my appointed assistant arrived, just in time. Danny was about to sip from her glass when my guy stumbled into Ted, spilling his drink all over Ted's shirt. Ted exploded, pushing the young man away while screaming about his shirt. Poor Ted never got the chance to finish his tirade. My interloper grabbed him and threw him onto the table. Danny jumped back, her glass flying as the wine spilled all over Ted. I couldn't have planned this any better. The young man now had a grip on Ted's jacket and was pummeling him pretty well before the bouncers arrived and pulled my hired assistant off the struggling man. They dragged the angry young man through the crowd and hustled him out the front door. By this time, Ted was up, and Danny was trying to console him as she applied a towel to his drenched shirt. Ted grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the club. I saw them rush to the parking attendant, and when I turned around, I saw my hired hand standing there with a huge grin. That was outstanding, I said, handing him an even $100. That performance should have gotten an Oscar. What did the bouncers do? He asked. Nothing. I know them all. They're good friends of mine. They just got me out of there in case your friend decided to take it further. Thanks for the cash, man. Anytime you need another performance, give me a call. You got it. By the way, what's your name? Dalton. Bill Dalton, at your service. He grinned as he bowed and handed me a card before leaving. The card read, William D. Dalton, Dalton Investigations, 1345 Falling Leaf Avenue, Barrington, California. I laughed when I realized this guy was a private investigator. He might come in handy after all. By the time I reached my car, Ted's Bentley was just pulling out of the parking facility. I dropped down behind a truck as Ted roared by. With Ted's angry demeanor, I doubted Danny noticed my truck. Hopping in, I took off after them, but the guy was so bent on his own agenda that he was long gone before I got up to speed. I decided to go back to her parents' home and wait. When I arrived, the Bentley was already in the driveway, but both Ted and Danny were not in the car. They must already be inside. No sooner had I thought that than the front door opened, and Ted came out, with Olivia in pursuit. I watched as they spoke, Ted nodding while Olivia became animated. After several minutes of this, Olivia smiled and hugged him before he was finally able to break away and get in his car. Olivia stood there frantically waving as the Bentley backed out and left. Olivia, why don't you marry him? I thought. She probably would, given the chance. But I didn't believe Ted would want to have anything to do with her, not just because of their considerable age difference. Olivia turned and walked back to the house, never noticing my truck as I passed. I followed the Bentley convertible as it drove along the freeway until it reached the off-ramp to Notting Hill Boulevard. Ted was going home, I guessed. He decided he needed a drink because the Bentley pulled into the parking lot of Daunt's Den, a local dive. I strolled into the bar and found Ted sitting in a booth with a platinum blonde sitting on his lap. He had his head buried so deep that he never noticed as I sat across from him. The blonde took notice, tapping him on the shoulder. When Ted came up for air, his companion pointed in my direction. "Who the hell are you?" He snarled as the blonde moved herself off his lap. I calmly said, "Let's start on a friendly note, shall we? You've already had one fight. Do you really want to mix it up again?" He stared at me for a while before answering, "What do you want?" "That's better. What does Olivia Doofus want from you regarding her daughter, Danny?" Surprise flashed across his face before he regained his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know any Olivia." I grabbed him by the throat and wrenched him across the table. "Listen up, you clueless fool. You went out tonight with my wife, Danny O'Flynn." With that statement, his eyes grew enormous. "I know Olivia is behind it, and you're going to tell me everything. Understand?" I squeezed his neck and watched as his face began to turn a nasty shade of purple. Releasing him, Ted grabbed his throat and gasped for air. In a whisper, he said, "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I growled. "Mrs. Doofus, Olivia, left a message asking me to call her. When I did, she asked if I remembered her daughter, Danny. I told her I remembered her from high school and college. I tried to get her to go out with me several times, but she was involved with some local boy at the time. Mrs. Doofus told me Danny was seeking a divorce from her husband for cheating on her, and that maybe Danny might be interested in seeing me again. If I was, she could set it up for me. The strange thing was, she wanted me to really put the moves on her daughter and seduce her, and she would compensate me for my time and effort. Of course I agreed. I had always dreamed of being with Danny. I stared at this man and asked, "Why would you need to be compensated? You've already got money." "No, not really. My father keeps me on a small stipend. He only gives me enough to survive. The Bentley's my father's. Any extra cash helps, so of course I agreed. Who was I to argue against a mother who wanted her daughter to have a good time on her dime? Mrs. Doofus was the one that set up the date tonight. What did you put in her wine? I saw the knowing look in his eyes, but he was playing dumb. Listen, we can do this the easy way, or I can make this very uncomfortable for you. Okay. Yeah, I slipped her a little concoction. I don't know what it was. Her mother gave it to me in case I needed to loosen her up a bit. I never did find out if it would have worked, he admitted, looking at me with wide eyes. You did that, didn't you? I smiled but didn't answer. Okay, here's what you're going to do. I want you to keep up the ruse of trying to charm Danny. He shook his head and said, Hell, this family is whacked. First her mother, and now her husband. What is it with you two? He stopped talking when he saw my expression. Let me finish. First, I want you to keep Olivia happy, knowing you're pursuing her daughter. She knows that if Danny has an affair with you, it will mean the end of our marriage. That is what this is all about. Second, I want Danny to decide how important our marriage is to her. If you are able to charm my wife, I will divorce her. You will not tell a soul about what I said. As far as you're concerned, Olivia thinks she's hired you to pursue her daughter. Got it? Ted Bauman gazed at me for a long time before replying. Yeah, I got it. I understand. You realize I will be pursuing your wife. I glared at him. Yep. Do your best, but don't let on that I know what's going on. Ted had a huge grin on his face. Okay, it's a deal. I can't believe this. Danny gets attention. I get paid, and you become history. Nodding, I said, That's about it. Ted asked one more thing. When I pursue your wife, and I will, you're not going to take any action against me. No, you're safe, but you will be named in the divorce if it comes to that, and you will tell me where and when you try to charm her. I held out my hand and said, Take this. Keep it with you. When you take her out, turn it on, and I'll hear everything the two of you say and do. In my palm was a tiny transmitter. Taking the small device, he said, That's cool. You need confirmation. Well, unless you've got anything else to say, I am out of here. Ted stood and walked to the entrance, stopped, turned, and stared at me. A smile spread across his face, and he laughed as he stepped out. I hoped I knew what I was doing. What Bauman didn't know was that I had taped our entire conversation. Before this was over, Olivia Doofus was going down for good. I stopped off at my local watering hole, the Hole in the Wall gang, and downed a few beers before heading home. It was going to be pretty lonely in that house tonight, but I'd better get used to it. I hit the switch for the garage, and the door began to roll up. Already, the emptiness hit me hard. Danny's old Toyota was missing. I sat there for several minutes, tears running down my face, before I mustered up the courage to pull in. I grabbed another beer from the fridge and sat down in my recliner, staring at a blank screen on my 55-inch widescreen TV. I must have dozed off sitting there, because the next thing I knew, the sun was in my face, and the house was silent. As I slowly pushed myself out of the chair and shuffled into the kitchen, the clock on the microwave displayed 6:00 a.m. I switched on the coffee maker, and in a matter of seconds, I could hear the water begin to percolate, and my life-giving juice start to pour into the pot. I could see myself in the reflection of the microwave door. I would scare off vultures just by my looks alone. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my brew, and thought through my checklist. I dealt with the situation involving Olivia, took care of Bauman, and I had recordings of both of them. I had film of Olivia with Bauman, and I managed to get a couple of stills of Danny and Bauman in the booth. I even got a shot of Bauman's hand hovering over Danny's wine glass, and one with his pinky stirring the wine. Now all I had to do was sit back and wait for Bauman's call. You'd think I'd call Danny and try to get her to talk to me, but I was following her wishes. She didn't want to see me or talk to me. Fine. I wouldn't. It was hard not to let her know what I had found out, to show her how her mother set me up. Well, screw her. She wouldn't even give me a chance to talk to her. Fine with me. Even when she does discover the truth, our marriage is over. If her love for me is so tenuous that she wouldn't give me a chance to explain, then why bother? Finishing my coffee, I hopped into the shower, shivering beneath the cold water. I always took cold showers. They made me feel fresh and alive. Afterward, after a shave and some dental hygiene, I felt a lot better. Time to head off to work. Just as I was walking out the door, my cell phone began to play the theme music from an old private investigator program called Peter Gunn. Dad, where are you? Hey, Ash, just heading out the door. Where are you? I'm calling from school, but I'm distressed right now. I talked to Mom last night, and she said the two of you had separated and would be getting a divorce. Is that true? What happened? What did you do? She started crying on the phone. Dad, she's really upset and angry with you. Why? Ashlyn, your mother thinks I cheated on her. I said as simply as I could. Did you? Baby girl, what do you think? No way, Dad. You love Mom too much. Why does she think you cheated? Now I had a dilemma. Should I tell my daughter what's been going on, or just feign ignorance? I don't know. Your mother won't talk to me. Grandmother has something to do with this, doesn't she? I always said my kids were smart. I can't say they. Not yet, anyway. Have you said anything to Katie? Not yet, but I'm going to call her after I'm done talking with you. She deserves to know. You do realize Katie's going to blame grandmother. Katie hates her more than me. I laughed to spite myself. Ashlyn, I may not get along with Danny's mother, but I won't have you talk like that. She is still your maternal grandmother, and it would devastate your mother to hear you talk like that. My heart broke when I heard my youngest daughter begin to cry. Baby girl, don't worry. It will be all right. Trust me. Daddy, are you sure, or are you just saying that? Trust me. Ash, everything will be okay. Make sure you tell Katie that all right. Between sniffles, Ashlyn said, I love you, Dad. Love you too, Ash. Now don't worry, okay? Okay, Dad, she gasped as she disconnected. I lied to her. I didn't have a clue if everything would be fine. In fact, the way I felt right now, Danny could take a flying leap. When I got into work, my secretary, Mary Beth, said Mr. Rolls wanted to see me the moment I came in. Terrific. Now what? Anything I should know about? No, Pat. Not that I know of. Mr. Rolls called personally and sounded okay to me. Actually, he sounded kind of excited. Huh. Another project, maybe. Just the thing for me to get out of here for a while. All these thoughts were running through my head when Mary Beth finally broke through. Pat. Hello. Earth to Pat. Sorry about that, Mary Beth. My mind kind of wandered there for a moment. Everything all right, Pat? The girl's okay. Danny? Yeah, everything's fine. I knew I didn't sound very convincing, and Mary Beth had an uncanny knack for reading people. Would you tell me if it wasn't? I smiled at her and said, Mary Beth, you're the ethics committee of my conscience. You would be the first to know if anything was wrong, even before I knew. She giggled and told me to stop procrastinating and see Mr. Rolls. A few moments later, I was standing before the Queen, Mrs. Delaney, David Rolls' secretary, or as he likes to say, his boss. Please go on, Pat. David's expecting you. Of course, Mr. Mackenzie and Mr. Forrest were also there. All three smiled as Mrs. Delaney shrugged as I opened the door and stepped into David Roll's office. I was immediately bombarded by greetings from all three. I've been employed by these men as long as I've been married, and couldn't have worked for a nicer bunch of guys. Pat, about time you came in. Sit down. We've got some things we need to discuss with you. David pointed to an empty chair next to him. They were all seated around a coffee table, resting in leather chairs. As I sat, John Mackenzie began. Pat, we've all three been very pleased with your performance over the past 20 years. I can't tell you how many times you've pulled our butts out of the fire on those overseas projects. Bill Forrest was beaming as he stared at me. Yes, you've been a tremendous benefit to this company. Every man and woman working for us has had nothing but praise for you. I think they would all quit if you ever left. God forbid, David added, picking up a folder from the coffee table and handing it to me. I opened the packet and stared at the top sheet. As I read the first paragraph, I discovered I was holding my breath. I started getting a little dizzy and gasped for air. My eyes ready to pop out of my skull, I stared at the three men and said, "Are you sure about this? There's got to be another candidate that is better qualified." All three laughed. Bill Forrest said, "Pay up." Smiling, John Mackenzie reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, handing it to Bill while chuckling. David said, "Bill bet that you would say that." John foolishly took the bet, but I think it was mostly for show. Again, all three laughed. Finally, David said, "Pat, without a doubt, you have proven to be the most valuable member of this company since we first hired you. As John said, you have saved this company from disaster on numerous occasions. Everyone looks up to you. Actually, this is overdue. We should have made you a partner a long time ago. Will you accept?" I was speechless. They were making me a full partner in the firm. I just stared at them. I didn't know what to say. "Pat," asked David, "you going to be okay? I know this was a lot to handle at once, but we really want you as a partner. You have the respect and admiration of all our clients and our competitors. You didn't know we knew about all the offers you turned down." I shook my head and chuckled. "I didn't think you knew. When I told them I wasn't interested in leaving, I thought that was the end of it." David smiled and said, "Hell, they called us asking if we could loan you out. Of course we refused. You had enough on your plate with us. Your work reputation, and especially your loyalty to this company, is what convinced us to offer you a partnership. I hope you will seriously consider it." Do I have to stay in an office? "Pay up," Forrest repeated. "Damn it, Pat, you're costing me money." Mackenzie growled good-naturedly. "No," David said, laughing. "We want you to be our eyes, ears, and hands. We figured you'd want to keep your hands dirty. So yes, you'll have your own office, but no, you don't have to always be there. You'll have your own executive assistant. Have anyone in mind?" I saw the sly looks each one of these men gave one another. "Yeah, I do have someone in mind. Mary Beth Winters." David yelled out, "Mrs. Delaney, is Pat's personal assistant here yet?" "Yes, Mr. Rolls. Please send her in." The door opened, and in walked Mary Beth, wearing a huge smile. "Congratulations, Pat. I wanted to tell you so bad, but it would have spoiled the surprise. Plus, I wasn't really sure you would want me as your personal assistant." "Thank you." I stood and embraced Mary Beth. "There is no one here that could put up with me like you. I should thank you for your support." She beamed as I turned to the three men, now standing, and said, "Thank you. I've loved this company since the first day I started here. What you have done here is way beyond what I deserve or expect. I am proud to be your newest partner." By this time, Mrs. Delaney had entered with a young man who was carrying 6 glasses and a bottle of champagne. Unbelievably, Mrs. Delaney stepped over and hugged me. "It's about time these three made you a partner, Pat. Congratulations." The three men laughed as the glasses were passed around. David raised his glass and said, to new partnerships, a long time coming. Mackenzie, Rolls, and Forrest raised their glasses and sipped. Then Mrs. Delaney held her glass high and toasted, to Mackenzie, Rolls, Forrest, and O'Flynn. This time, we all raised our glasses and drank. All three men shook my hand and patted me on the back as everyone began filing out of the office. "Pat, why don't you take some time off? Like a month. Get away with Danny on some exotic trip to celebrate. Mary Beth will have everything ready for you on your return." I thought I hid my misery when they mentioned Danny, but Mary Beth saw right through me. She moved over to me, leaning in and whispering, "Later." I nodded, and she smiled as she touched my shoulder. "Sounds like a plan, David. I think I'll do just that." John Mackenzie said, "Good. We don't want to hear from you for at least a month. Oh, and when you return, we just got another project for the company. You'll need to find your replacement." I nodded again, shaking everyone's hand before leaving. Mary Beth caught up to me, grabbing my arm and yanking me into my new office. Shutting the door, she turned and stared. "Okay, out with it. What's going on between you and Danny?" I told her everything. It was as if a dam had burst, and all the pent-up water rushed out. By the time I was done, I was nearly in tears. She held me tight as I let everything out. "Damn it, Pat, why won't you tell her what you already know?" asked Mary Beth. "Danny didn't cause this. Her mother did. She's punishing you for her mother's hatred of you. She needs to know." No. Danny jumped to her conclusions without confronting me. She already wrote me off without any defense. Now I discover she went out with another man with her mother's blessing. No. Goddamn it. No. Pat, you know her mother probably forced her to go out with him. That's the problem, Mary Beth. She won't stand up to her mother. I am surprised she ever married me. Well, she's going to find out just how much her dear mother loves her and our family. Okay, Pat. Okay. Just remember, she loves you. I nodded but didn't reply. Mary Beth leaned up and kissed me on the cheek, whispering, "Don't worry. Everything will be okay. Trust me." I just smiled. Those were the very words I said to Ashlyn. "Now get out of here and take care of your family. I'll make sure everything is ready for you when you return." I hugged Mary Beth until she pushed me away, saying, "Patrick, I can't breathe. Now go." Go where? I thought to myself. Suddenly, I thought of Katie. "Thanks, Mary Beth. I'm out of here. Take good care of yourself. I need you more than ever now." Mary Beth waved as I quickly strolled out of the office and out of the building. Running to my truck, I tore off for Los Angeles and Katie. It didn't take long to reach LA. By noon, I was looking up at the tall skyline of the design company where my Katie worked. Once I found a parking garage, I marched into the lobby and asked for Stellar Wind's design studio. I was directed to the 5th floor. Now I was standing in front of an exceptionally gorgeous receptionist, asking if Katie O'Flynn was available. The beautiful redhead looked up at me with her striking blue eyes, biting her lower lip as she asked, "May I ask your name?" "Patrick. Patrick O'Flynn. Any relation to Katie?" Yes. She's my daughter." "Get out. There's no way a handsome guy like you has a daughter as old as Katie." "Yep. I'm afraid so." "Can I see her?" "You most certainly can. In fact, I'll let you see anything you like, if you get my drift." I must have turned 12 shades of red and gulped as she punched a button. "Sam, what's up?" I smiled at Katie's voice. "There's a gorgeous guy standing in front of my desk, and he says he's Patrick O'Flynn. He even says he's your father. Say it isn't true." I heard my daughter laugh. "Oh my God. Dad's here." "Sam, stay away from him. He's off limits. Understand?" "Oh, fine. Just come and get him before I do." Sam stared at me like I was something on a hook while I waited for Katie. "Please hurry, baby," I thought as I gazed around the bustling office. "Daddy, you're here. Oh my God, you're actually here." Katie ran into my arms, hugging me, and then kissing me on the cheek. "Oh, save some for me," Sam teased. "Katie, stop it. Sam, he's mine. Come on, Dad. Let me show you around." Holding my hand, she took me past the double doors into the back. Everywhere, people were hustling around, carrying reams of material and paper. Most of them were pretty young, about Katie's age. "What are you doing here, Dad? Does this have something to do with what Ash told me? Are you and Mom really having problems? Ash said something about a separation and maybe divorce. Dad, what did you do? Why would Mom leave and want a divorce? Did you have an affair? God, Dad, why would you do something like that? What about Ash and me? Did you even think about us?" Katie's questions were rapid fire and nonstop as we walked along the corridor. People turned and stared as we passed by. Finally, she shoved me into a small office and forced me into a tiny metal chair with a small wooden seat and backing. Sitting next to me, she waited. "Okay, Katie, first of all, I am not having, nor have I ever had, an affair. I have never cheated on your mother. I've never even been tempted, so get that out of your head. Second, for some reason, your sweet, lovable mother has gotten the idea that I have, and she won't even let me talk to her. She moved in with your grandparents, and she is the one seeking a divorce, not me." "Oh my God. Mom's living with Brumilda," Katie exclaimed. "Where did you hear that?" I asked, flabbergasted. "Oh, come on, Dad. Ash and I must have heard you say that 1,000,000 times. You think Ash, and I don't know that Grandma has never accepted you, that she wants you out of Mom's life. When and how did you girls figure that out?" "Dad, Ash mentioned it to me when I was 12, and she was 11. She noticed it first, and after she confided in me, we began to watch the two of you. We were proud of the way you tolerated the situation. Sorry, Dad, but I've learned to call it when I see it. Ash, and I knew that our dear, sweet grandmother was always trying to put you down in front of Mom, and how she always controlled Mom." I just stared at Katie, marveling at how my two girls had matured. "Well, somehow, I'll figure out a way to get your mother to talk to me. Anyway, I've got some exciting news, and I had to tell someone in the family." Katie's eyes widened with anticipation. "What? Tell me, Dad. What is it?" "I've been made a full partner. The company is now Mackenzie, Rolls, Forrest, and O'Flynn. How does that sound? What do you think of your old man now?" Katie just stared at me. I wasn't sure if she understood the gravity of my partnership. Suddenly, she screamed and jumped into my lap, wrapping her arms around me in a huge hug. "Oh my God. That's terrific, Dad. A full partner. Oh my God. I don't believe it. Does Mom know?" I just looked at her, my eyes rolling, and she giggled. "No, I guess not. But Dad, she'd want to know. I just know she would. You have to tell her." I shook my head and mumbled, "How am I to do that? She won't even talk to me, and she's under guard by Brumilda. Maybe I can tell her." "No, neither you nor Ash will say anything to her. Understand?" Katie looked down and said, "Yeah, I understand." "Look at me." My beautiful daughter looked up at me. "Promise me you will not tell your mother, and you will not have Ash do it." "Damn it, Dad. Mom needs to know. Promise me." Reluctantly, she nodded and said, "I promise. Neither Ash nor I will tell her." "Thank you. Now, can I take you out to dinner?" "I'd love it, Dad." Can I bring a guest?" "Sure. One of your friends." "My God, not Sam, is it?" Katie laughed and said, "No, not Sam, though you might not get out of the building. No, it's my boyfriend." "Boyfriend?" "Well, Dad, kind of more than just a boyfriend. We're living together." "What? Does your mother know?" "Of course not. You think I'm suicidal. Jack wants to marry me, but I keep putting him off. I don't know if I'm ready to settle down just yet. But I love him." "What about Ash? Does she know?" Yeah," Katie said quietly. "I swore her to secrecy." Shaking my head, I said, "Fine. You better bring him along." I think it's high time I met your boyfriend. How about Lowe's at 7? Sounds great, Dad. I'll see you there. She hugged me again and planted a kiss on my cheek before she asked, "You think you need an escort to escape from the building?" I laughed, thinking of the receptionist. "Nah, I think I can handle it." Laughing, she replied, "I don't know. Sam can be a force herself if you're not careful. See you at 7. As I walked into the hallway, I heard Katie punching numbers into her phone. I turned to stare, and she grinned, saying, "Only business, Dad. I did promise I wouldn't call Mom, you know." I nodded, grinning, and left. As I passed through the lobby, a voice purred, "I hope to see you again real soon, Daddy." I smiled at Sam as she blew me a kiss after sensually licking her upper lip. "Take care, Sam," I said as I stepped into the elevator. Just as the doors were closing, she teased me with those smoldering eyes. I heard her giggle as I closed my eyes and shook my head. I drove around LA, taking in the sights and deciding to do a little browsing along the jewelry mart. It was amazing the kind of deals you could get with cash. Soon, it was nearing 7, and I headed to Lowe's restaurant, known to have the best prime rib in the country. Katie and a young man stood by the entrance as I approached. She spied me, gave me a big hug and kiss, then stepped aside to introduce me to her boyfriend. "Dad, this is Jack Hennessy. Jack, this is my father, Patrick Michael O'Flynn, the newest partner to the largest development company this side of the Rockies, Mackenzie, Rolls, Forrest, and O'Flynn Incorporated." I had to admit the lad was handsome in a rugged way. His dark brown hair was well-groomed, and I could see the intelligence in those hazel eyes. The young man was dressed casually, but it was well chosen for the likes of Lowe's. "It's a privilege to finally meet you, sir," said Jack as we shook hands. "Jack, it's good to meet you. However, I prefer you call me Pat." "Okay, yes, Pat. Katie has told me so much about you." As he mentioned my wife, he failed to see the quick look exchanged between Katie and me. "Let's eat," I said, wanting to move the topic away from her mother. After dinner, the three of us stood in front of the restaurant as Katie chastised me about her mother. "Dad, I agree with Ashlyn. Someone needs to tell Mom what has been going on and what Grandma has been doing to break you two up. God, Dad, how can you let her get away with this?" I sternly looked at her and warned, "Katie, promise me you won't say anything to your mother. Promise me." She looked at Jack for backup, but he held his hands up and said, "Katie, this is a family thing. I am not taking sides in this." Katie huffed and spun back to me. "Okay, I promise. But you're making a terrible mistake. Katie, sweetie, please understand. Your mother means the world to me, but for the last 4 weeks, I've been less than ideal to her. She hasn't told me what was wrong. She hasn't allowed me to explain or defend myself. And now I find out she went out with another man. At her mother's urging. How long have we been married?" Katie looked sheepishly at me and softly replied, 22 years. "That's right. 22 years. 22 years of good and bad, happiness and bitterness, love and heartache. That's what a marriage is. That's why they say for better or for worse. I love your mother more than anyone could ever imagine, and I believe she loved me just as much. That's why this hurts so much now. She allowed her mother to manipulate her again, getting her to go out with another man. I interfered with their date this time, but no more. Now she makes the choice, whether based on faulty information or not. Understand?" "No, Dad, I don't, and I won't. As far as I'm concerned, you're both wrong, pie-headed, and stubborn. If you two divorce, Ash and I will blame both of you. Do you understand?" I sighed and looked into her eyes. I nodded and said, "Yeah, I understand. All too well. Okay, Dad, I promise I won't tell Mom. But don't let this thing drag on much longer, or allow Mom to get hurt. If that happens, all bets are off." She came into my arms and hugged me, giving a quick peck on the cheek before she grabbed Jack and walked away. She turned once to stare and smiled. I laughed when I heard her tease her boyfriend, and then watched as she and Jack disappeared around the corner. I made for my truck, soon heading south back home. When I pulled into the driveway, I choked when I saw the dark house. I didn't consider it a home anymore, with Danny gone. I sat in the truck for nearly an hour, feeling sorry for myself, before I finally pulled myself out and into the house. As I stepped in, I saw the flashing red light on the phone, indicating someone had left a message. Checking the machine, I found 3 messages waiting. The first message was from that Ahole Bauman. Mr. O'Flynn, you'll be happy to know Danny has agreed to go out with me again. I promise you, this will be a very special night. And yes, I'll provide proof. Don't you worry about that. I thought you'd like to know I have reservations at Chez Rance, he said, almost giggling like a little boy with a new toy. A penthouse suite at the Hilton Towers. Make sure you don't interfere. I could hear the scorn in his voice. God, I wanted to reach through that phone and rip him apart. Chez Rance was a very expensive and exclusive French restaurant that was hard to get reservations at, and the Hilton Towers was the most prestigious hotel in the area. He knew he was at war and was setting his strategy. The second call was a surprise. Danny. She sounded sad and lost. Patrick, I can't see any way around this. I thought you loved me. I'm going to see a lawyer Monday. Damn it, Pat. Why? She was crying when she hung up. Olivia, I thought. I promise myself one thing. Whether Danny and I are able to work through this or not, she is out of my life. I slammed the phone down and was going to ignore the third message but changed my mind. This one was unexpected. It was from her father, Harvey. He wanted to meet with me tomorrow at noon at my office. I wondered what he wanted. I thought back to Danny's call. Was I wrong in the way I was handling all this? I was beginning to doubt myself and Danny's love for me. I made my way to the liquor cabinet and grabbed the Jack Daniels. The only thing I wanted to do right now was drown out these voices in my head, and JD was just the thing. It wasn't long before I heard someone groaning. A bright light hurt my eyes when I cracked them open. I felt like one of those observers during the 50s nuke tests. Nothing but a flash of brilliant white light. I threw my left hand over my eyes and found myself staring out the living room window at the sunrise. Where am I? When I turned my head, my brain exploded in pain, and I grunted as my hangover took control. I was on the couch, covered in a blanket. Now who the hell threw a blanket over me? I muttered. I felt my stomach rumble, and that familiar feeling I get before I have to pray to the porcelain god began to course through me. I tossed the blanket on the floor and crawled off the couch to stumble into the bathroom. I just made it to the toilet as I vomited into the bowl. I just wanted to curl up and die. I rested my chin on the toilet rim and closed my eyes. I didn't want to budge. This was my spot, my chosen location to die. Jesus, it smells in here. What did you do? Blow both barrels at the same time. God, Pat, the only time you're like this is from drinking too much. Leave me to die in misery alone, I muttered through the drool. Haven't you done enough to me? I couldn't turn my head to look at what was once the love of my life. I heaved more of my stomach into the commode. You mean you don't understand? I wasn't the one to set up house with my best friend. Danny, why the hell are you here? You wouldn't talk to me. You wouldn't tell me what I did to upset you. You wouldn't let me try and defend myself. You left to live with that mother of yours, and you started dating other men. Then you leave a message saying you're going to see a lawyer, which tells me it's over between us. So I ask you, what the hell are you doing here? Get whatever you need and let me die in peace, okay? Without saying a word, Danny turned and left. Thank God, I thought, as I retched yet again, offering further sacrifice to the gods. When I finally got control of my stomach, I managed to push myself up and stand. Wobbling a bit, I made my way into the bedroom and tripped, falling against the corner bedpost before everything went black. Deja vu. I groaned as I gradually opened my eyes to the sound of tones and beeping in darkness. "Okay, Dad, I promise I won't tell Mom. But don't let this thing drag on much longer or allow Mom to get hurt. If that happens, all bets are off." Her voice echoed in my head like a cruel reminder. I blinked, trying to clear the haze. I realized I was lying on my back, hooked up to tubes and monitors. Where was I now? "Not again," I groaned, moving my head slightly, which was a big mistake. "I'm in a goddamn hospital. What the hell did I do now?" I vaguely remembered tripping over something and smashing my head against the bedpost. But how did I end up here? Danny. Was Danny there? I thought, confused. I remembered something about her yelling at me, but maybe it was a dream. Or maybe it wasn't. "Hey, Slick, back with the living." I see. That voice. I'd know that voice anywhere. I turned my head and regretted it instantly as the pain slammed into my skull. Danny chuckled. "You always had a way of impressing me with your graceful ways." How did I end up here? I muttered, closing my eyes again. "Well, after you decided to empty an entire bottle of Jack's finest amber, you managed to crawl into the bathroom and empty whatever was left of your stomach into the toilet and other obvious locations. Afterward, you tripped over those gunboat-sized shoes of yours and smashed your head against the bedpost. How your noggin found that tiny extended corner, I'll never know, but you opened up your scalp pretty good. Blood everywhere. God, Pat, but you were a gusher. I really thought I might have lost you this time." Her tone softened as she continued. "I turned you over, shoved a compress over the wound, and called 911. "Why?" I croaked, not meeting her gaze. I could tell from the tone of her voice that she knew what I meant. "Why were you at the house? Why did you take care of me? Why are you still here? Come on, Sherlock. Figure it out. I know you're only a mechanical engineer, but I have faith you can come up with a solution," she said sarcastically. It was at that moment I lost it. I'd had it, with her temper, her sarcasm, her mother, everything. I was done with it all. "Danny, you win. I lose. Get your lawyer. You can have everything, anything you want. You want it all. Take it. I don't care anymore. Believe whatever you want. The moment I'm out of this room, I'm gone. You can have the house, the money, the savings, everything, okay? Just go. Leave me alone. Please, go back to your boyfriend, Ted Bauman. Your mother will love that. I won't be around anymore for her to bust my chops. Just remember, after the dust settles, who is behind all this?" I tried to sit up, but my head felt like it would implode, so I lay back down, muttering under my breath. Danny left without saying a word. Seconds later, a soft voice spoke. "Mr. O'Flynn, you must remain still." I felt warm hands over my arm and forehead, checking the connections and dressing. She must have been my nurse. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely audible. I was having a little discussion with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I guess I got a little upset. "You mean the woman that just ran out of here?" the nurse asked gently. "Yeah," I muttered. "What did you say to her?" She was in tears, sobbing as she ran past the station. "Nothing really. I just told her I give up." That soft voice continued in a whisper. For someone who won, she looked so sad, so defeated. Really, she was crying. "Oh yes, I've seen it before, but usually for someone who has lost a loved one to illness. She must love you an awful lot." I didn't say anything further. The nurse fussed over me for another minute, but before she left, she touched my cheek and said, "Don't give up on her." A tear trickled down my face, and I began to cry. I hid my face in my arm and sobbed. All my anger, frustrations, and heartache boiled to the surface. Sweet Jesus, maybe they were conspiring against me, my wife, my girls, this nurse, and God. I felt her fingers gently run through my hair, and when her palm grazed my ear, I grabbed it and held it against my wet cheek. When I realized what I was doing, I quickly released her, apologizing profusely. "Geez, I am so sorry. Really, I shouldn't have," she whispered tenderly, delicately wiping the tears from my face. My eyes snapped open in astonishment when her soft lips brushed mine. "Please, Patrick, don't turn me away. Please." "Danny?" I gasped. "I thought you'd left." "I made it to the lobby before I mustered up enough courage to come back," she whispered. "Patrick, I don't care what you did. I only know I can't live without you. But can you love me enough to come back to me? Can you live without Crystal? I want you back, but you have to be only with me, Patrick. Can you do that?" Danny was sobbing along with me. I grabbed her and pulled her into my arms, holding tight to the woman who drove me absolutely nuts. I wanted to tell her that nothing had happened between me and Crystal, and that her mother made the whole thing up. But I didn't want to lose what we had right now. I was afraid that if I told her everything I knew, she wouldn't believe me, and she would leave. Having her in my arms, both of us together again, I didn't want to lose it. Finally, I said, "Danny, I will do anything you want. I need you beside me." She hugged me, pulling me tight against her, her lips crushed against mine. God, I love this woman, I thought. God, Pat, I've missed you so much. Can I come home? As far as I'm concerned, you never left. We'll go home together. They'll wait until they release you. Patrick, do you need anything from your parents? She asked softly. No, I don't want to go there. I'll wait here with you. Okay. Danny? Yes, my love. I need you to call your father. He wanted to meet me at work today at noon. Tell him I can't make it. Why? What did he want to see you about? I don't know. Danny, do you know anything? Danny was quiet for a moment, as if hesitant to say. Maybe it's because of Ted Bauman. What about Bowman? She seemed reluctant to share something I already knew, but she didn't know I was aware of her date. I let Mom talk me into allowing Ted to take me out to dinner. She was convinced you were cheating on me, and that I should get even. I was so confused. I didn't know half the time what I was doing. Patrick, I am so sorry. I went out with him one night, but it turned into a fiasco. Some drunk picked a fight with Ted, and pretty much ended the evening for us. Pat, I wasn't going to do anything other than have dinner with the man. I knew what he wanted, but I wasn't going there. Do you believe me? I nodded and said, yes. Was that the only time you went out with him? I asked calmly. She quickly nodded but added, he did invite me to go with him to Chez Rance. I have to tell you, Pat, I was almost tempted. I've never been to Chez Rance, and I was dying to see it. He was pretty upset when I told him I wasn't interested, and so was Mom. When she wouldn't let it drop, that's when I went home and found you on the couch. Did you put the blanket over me? I asked softly. Danny smiled and nodded. I saw the empty Jack Daniels bottle on the floor. I knew you'd be out until morning, so I covered you up and slept in the bedroom. When I heard you in the bathroom, I tried talking to you. I wanted to help you, but you were so angry. I fled back to the bedroom. I was on the bed when you stumbled in and fell against the bedpost. Oh, Patrick, I was so frightened by all the blood. I thought I'd lost you. I ran my hand over her hair as I held her close. Well, you didn't. You rescued me again. I always seemed to fall for you. She laughed and kissed me. The next day, I was able to leave the hospital. They only kept me overnight for observation in case I had a concussion, which I did, but it was mild. They wheeled me out into the lobby, and Danny was standing there waiting by the car. Once free of the hospital, she drove me home. We didn't say much until she pulled into the garage. Patrick, why don't you go into the bedroom and get some rest? I'll be back shortly. Why? Where are you going? I asked, suspicious. Oh, just have some unfinished business to take care of. Nothing important, but I want you well rested for tonight. I admit I was a little leery. Danny seemed to be up to something. Danny, is everything good between us now? She hesitated before looking at me and saying, "Yes, everything is fine. Now get some rest, take this prescription medication, and get some sleep. I'll see you in a bit." She leaned over, kissed me, and waited as I got out of the car. I watched as she backed out, waved, and drove away. I went inside and shuffled into the kitchen, grabbing some aspirin. I downed 3 of the pills, nabbed a glass of ice water, and moved into the family room. Settling into my recliner, I read the label for the prescription medication and noted it said to take only 1. This is some potent stuff, I thought. I don't need this right now. Sipping some of the water, I eased back and closed my eyes. Within minutes, I was out. Be careful with him. I don't want him hurt. Oh God. All right already. Help me with him. He's not lightweight. I don't know how long I slept, but I could hear Danny's voice and someone else talking. It sounded like they were trying to pull me out of the chair. They must have thought I had taken the meds and was knocked out. Something wasn't quite right about all this. Who the hell was the guy? I decided to play along and see where this led. "Pat, I forgot how big you are," said my wife, sounding a little tipsy as she and her companion carried me down the hallway and into our bedroom. They laid me onto the bed, and with Danny pulling from one side, the guy pushed me into the center. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we tie him to the bed and make sure the rope is tight. When he sees me with you, he's going to want to kill us both," her companion said. "God, am I doing the right thing? He messed around, and you're going to even the score. Come on, Danny, you want him to see how it feels to see his wife with another man. Once we do this, maybe you can finally move on." I didn't hear her reply, but I felt her little hand grab my left wrist and wrap a cord around it. Before he realized what was happening, I curled my hand around his wrist and twisted it hard. I was satisfied by the sound of a snapped wrist and a piercing scream. Holding the screaming man, I scrambled off the bed and stared at a surprised, frightened, and suddenly sober Danny. "You stupid witch. You royally messed up this time, Danny." Here I thought things were going to be good between us, but no. You just couldn't believe the man you supposedly loved these past 20 years, could you? "Well, Danny, let me tell you what's been going on." Her face was pale as I held Ted Bauman, who was now kneeling on the floor, cradling his injured arm. "Your sweet, loving mother set us up, or at least, she set you up, you idiot. Olivia paid Crystal $10,000 to pose for some sleazy private investigator. He doctored photos to make it look like Crystal and I were involved. Crystal was paid by your mother to deceive you. You're crazy, Pat. My mother would never do that. You're just trying to deflect the blame for what you and Crystal did. And like the coward you are, you won't admit it." I stared at her, fury and rage twisting the woman I loved into something repulsive. I looked at Ted Bauman, kneeling on the floor, holding his injured limb, whimpering. He flinched as I stepped over him and reached into the closet, pulling out my voice recorder. I threw it at her. "When you have the time, listen to what you refuse to believe, you stupid witch. I'm out of here. Make sure you and this low-life piece of trash are gone by the time I get back." I looked at Ted and shook my head in sympathy. "You fool. I told you what would happen if you tried anything funny. All bets are off now. You're on that recorder too, you idiot. Oh, and both of you, don't worry about destroying that recording. I've got copies for my lawyer." Stopping in the kitchen, I grabbed my bag from the hospital, snagged the keys to my truck, and bolted from the house. Seconds later, the neighbors heard the screech of my tires as I tore out of the neighborhood. Danny stood there, her chest heaving from the confrontation. She was shaking with a mix of anger and despair. "That son of a witch has the audacity to blame my mother for his infidelity," she thought bitterly. "Ugh, my wrist hurts," cried Ted Bauman, still on the floor next to the bed. Danny stared at the moaning Ted and moved toward him, helping him sit on the bed. "Here, let me look at that. Oh God, I am so sorry, Ted. Pat must have injured your wrist when he grabbed you. We better get that looked at." Still holding the little voice recorder in her hand, she stuffed it into her pocket and helped Ted out of the house and into her car. At the hospital, she waited while his wrist was x-rayed, and then she sat with him until the doctor returned. "Mr. Bauman, it's not fractured, just a simple sprain. Let me wrap this wrist and give you a prescription for an anti-inflammatory." "You sure my wrist isn't broken? I'm in a lot of pain here," Ted grumbled. "It's not broken, Mr. Bauman. When you get home, wrap some ice around it to stop the swelling. In a few days, it should be better." "Thank you, doctor," said Danny, trying to hide her frustration as she followed a grumbling Ted out of the ER. "Let me take you home," Danny offered. "Your car is at my mother's, but I don't know if you can drive." Ted smiled weakly and shook his head. "Thank you, but I'll get my car. Besides, I think you need a friend tonight." Danny nodded reluctantly. "Thanks, Ted. I'd like that." She drove him to her mother's house in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, her mother came running out, her face red and blotchy as if she had been crying. "Mama, what's wrong?" Danny called as she jumped out of the car. Her mother, Olivia, wailed, "It's your father." "Daddy? What's wrong with Dad? Is he all right? Where is he?" Danny asked frantically, running to her mother. He has left me," Olivia sobbed. "What? Why?" I don't know," Olivia cried as Danny helped her into the house. Ted followed behind, still cradling his wrist. Once inside, Danny pressed her mother for answers. "Mom, you must have some idea why he would just leave like that. What was the fight about?" Olivia stared into her daughter's concerned eyes before breaking down again. "It was over you and Patrick," she finally wailed. "Me and Patrick? What about me and Patrick?" Danny demanded, her voice rising. "I told him Patrick didn't deserve you, that he cheated on you and refused to confess his affairs. Your father disagreed and said I was trying to set Patrick up, trying to railroad him into a divorce. He wouldn't believe me when I told him how wrong he was. We got into a horrible fight, and he packed up and left me. Oh, Danny, your father left me." Olivia cried hysterically. Danny stared at her mother in shock. The weight of everything was crashing down on her. First, Crystal's confession about Patrick's supposed affair and the damning photos. Then moving in with her parents. Then letting Ted take her out. And now her father leaving her mother. Everything was unraveling, and it felt like she was losing control of her life. Still trying to process, Danny turned to Ted and said, "Let me go to my room for a moment. I just need a little time to think." Ted nodded sympathetically, and Olivia waved her off as she continued sobbing. Danny went into her old bedroom and closed the door. She fell onto the bed and started crying. She missed Patrick terribly, but how could she forgive him when her mind still swirled with doubt? "What the hell is going on?" she sobbed. She sat up, wiped her tears, and smoothed out her clothes. As she adjusted her pants, she felt something in her pocket. Reaching in, she pulled out the small silver voice recorder Patrick had thrown at her. What did he mean by, "Listen to what you refuse to believe"? She wondered aloud. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she turned the recorder on. Immediately, she recognized Crystal's voice. Danny sat frozen as she listened, her heart sinking lower with every word. Crystal confessed everything. The fake affair, the doctored photos, and the money her mother had paid her. Patrick was right all along. Her mother had set him up. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" Danny cried. "Patrick, what have I done?" She buried her face in her hands, shaking with guilt and shame. Her sobs soon subsided, and she fell asleep clutching the recorder in her hand. Olivia was pacing in her own bedroom, fuming over Harvey's departure. "How dare he leave me for defending my daughter?" she thought bitterly. She rummaged through the closet until she found what she was looking for, her father's old Colt revolver. She remembered how he had taught her to clean and fire the gun. Opening the cylinder, she loaded it with 357 Magnum rounds, snapping it shut with a flick of her wrist. She dropped the gun into her purse, grabbed her car keys, and marched out of the house. Danny stirred awake when she heard the front door slam. She groggily realized the recorder was no longer in her hand and searched frantically for it. When she saw her bedroom door was slightly ajar, she realized her mother must have taken it. If she heard it, she knows she's been exposed, Danny thought, panicking. Dear God, what is she going to do? She jumped off the bed and ran to the window, watching her mother's car peel out of the driveway. I've got to find Patrick, she whispered, fear rising in her chest. Patrick sat at the bar, swirling the last remnants of his whiskey in the glass. The dim lighting of Mike's bar, the hole in the wall, did little to soothe the storm in his chest. He wasn't thinking about Danny, Olivia, or even Bauman anymore. At this point, he didn't care about anything. He just wanted the world to leave him alone. You think you've had enough, Pat? Mike's booming voice came from across the bar. Nah, Patrick muttered. I can still think. How about another Boilermaker? Mike eyed him carefully. Sure, but only if you promise to stay here tonight. No driving. You're in no shape. Patrick waved a hand dismissively. Yeah. No problem. Just as long as I can no longer see my wife's face banging around in my brain, then you can do anything you want with me. Mike laughed as he brought over another draft and a shot of Jameson. There you go, my friend. But remember, this isn't therapy. It's a bar. Patrick downed the shot, dropped the glass into his beer, and chugged it down in a few long gulps. Slamming the glass on the counter, he mumbled, Thanks, Mike. You're one in a million. Mike shook his head as Patrick leaned back on the stool, staring blankly at the wall. It wasn't long before he felt Mike's strong arms pull him off the stool. Come on, buddy. You've hit your limit. Let's get you to bed, Mike said, helping him to the small room he kept for regulars who had a bit too much. Patrick didn't fight it. He let Mike guide him to the cot in the back room. The next thing he knew, he was waking up to the searing brightness of sunlight streaming through the small window. Groaning, he rubbed his crusty eyes and muttered, Back with the living, I guess. A soft voice startled him. Barely. He turned his head too quickly and immediately regretted it as the pain from his hangover shot through his skull. Blinking through the haze, he saw Danny sitting in a chair near the cot, her face pale and tear-streaked. What the hell are you doing here? He croaked. I thought I made it very clear we were done. Over. Finished. Danny's lower lip trembled, and to his surprise, she burst into uncontrollable sobs. Patrick, she gasped between tears. I am so very sorry. Please forgive me. Patrick's mind swirled with confusion and bitterness. What do you want, Danny? He said harshly. You made your choice. I'm done. Danny sniffled and held up the small voice recorder. I know everything now, Patrick. I listened to the recording. I know my mother set you up. She paid Crystal to lie. She doctored the photos. Everything you tried to tell me. I know it's true now. Oh God. Patrick, I've been such a fool. Patrick's face remained hard. He had begged her to listen to him, to trust him, but she hadn't. Now, after all the damage had been done, she wanted forgiveness. You don't deserve me, Danny, he said coldly, sitting up. You're just like her. Your mother. You jump to conclusions. You don't listen to reason. You let her manipulate you over and over. And now you want me to just forget everything and take you back. Danny recoiled, as if he'd slapped her. Her sobs quieted, but the tears continued to fall silently down her cheeks. She whispered, Patrick, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I love you. I love you so much. That's why I lost it when I thought you had cheated on me. I couldn't handle the idea of losing you. Patrick laughed bitterly. You lost me the moment you let Olivia poison our marriage. I can't do this anymore, Danny. Before she could respond, there was a loud commotion at the front of the bar. Both of them turned as Mike burst into the back room, his face grim. Pat, Mike said urgently, "You need to come out here. Now." "What is it?" Patrick asked, annoyed. Mike didn't answer but gestured for him to follow. Patrick stood, swaying slightly from his hangover, and followed Mike to the bar. Danny trailed behind him, her face still pale with worry. As they stepped into the main room, Patrick froze. Standing at the entrance, looking disheveled and unhinged, was Olivia. In her hand, she held a large Colt revolver. The steel glinted menacingly in the dim light of the bar. "Patrick O'Flynn!" Olivia screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You've ruined my life. You've stolen my daughter from me. And now you've taken my husband, too. I'll be damned if I let you take anything else." Patrick instinctively pushed Danny behind him. "Olivia, put the gun down. You don't want to do this." "Don't tell me what I want," she shrieked, raising the revolver. "You've destroyed everything I've worked for. You don't deserve to live." "Mom, no," Danny cried, trying to push past Patrick, but he held her back. At that moment, Harvey stepped into the bar, his face stricken. "Olivia, stop this madness." Olivia turned to him, her eyes wild. "Harvey, you betrayed me. You left me for him. How could you?" Harvey raised his hands cautiously and began to approach her. "Olivia, please, put the gun down. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Patrick O'Flynn has to die." Before she could aim the gun, Mike appeared behind her, moving with surprising speed for a man of his size. In one swift motion, he brought a sap down on the back of her head. Olivia crumpled to the floor, the gun slipping from her hand. Danny screamed and ran to her mother, kneeling beside her as Harvey followed, his face pale. Mike picked up the revolver, carefully lowering the hammer. He looked at Patrick and said dryly, "You've got some serious drama in your life, buddy." Patrick sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Thanks, Mike. I owe you again." Danny looked up from where she knelt beside Olivia, tears streaming down her face. "Patrick, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know I've let you down. But please, please don't give up on me. On us." Patrick stared at her, his emotions a tangled mess. He didn't know if he could trust her again. But as he looked into her tear-filled eyes, he felt a flicker of the love they had shared for over 20 years. "Let's take this one step at a time, Danny," he said quietly. "One step at a time." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.